Shalom and good evening, everybody. I'm very happy that we are all here. I think that this round table or panel is between you and the beach. So hopefully you will go to the beach later, and it is much more secured because 6 o'clock is okay, the sun is very good, and it's a great time to come. I would like first of all to thank all of you who came especially for this very important round table, a very unique one in a minute I will say. And I would like to thank all the people who came especially from overseas, from the United States, from Croatia. We have the minister from Serbia, we have the minister from Poland, we have people from the UK, and we have of course Ms. Mihoto from Japan. If I didn't mention anybody, it's not because I don't want to mention. I appreciate everybody who came and the great job. And at that part, at the right part, sitting a very special gentleman, which is one of the guys who is Aviram Bachar. He is in charge of the critical infrastructure. But before I start, I would like just to mention that this is a very special event. First of all, because the Israeli National Cyber Director is here with the full strength. We have Rafi Franco, who is heading he's the director, Deputy Director General for Robustness. And we have next to him also Eli Gazit. I want them to see you. I know that you are shy. Eli Gazit is the Executive Director, Critical Infrastructure Division. So if we are speaking about how the government is really directing or guiding the full civilian sector, these are the right people to deal with. And what I wanted to say, it is so special for me. My name is Rami Efrati. I'm the self-nominated Cyber Ambassador of Israel, but also the former head of the Civilian Sector Division. The important thing and why I say it is a very unique one, because we never, let's make it this way, I never believed that one day the government will come to a meeting and will come out with their ideas how to identify what we call national critical infrastructure. So it is the first time. And our success will be if we will be very open to each other and we'll really speak what we think, like the Israeli way, you know, and we'll share for our experience. I know that when we are speaking about critical infrastructure, everything is thinking about something else. Most of the people here are dealing with either critical infrastructure, meaning energy, utilities, public utilities, and gas, etc. But we have also the private sector, because it's very important to listen to the private sector. And if anybody is dealing with the PPP, the public-private partnership, I can tell you from our experience, always, always ask the civilian market. Let them speak. Let them say what they think and work together with them. So it's a very unique one. And although we are focusing today mainly on critical infrastructure, meaning energy, we will do it with all the, you can refer to any other things. One more gadget that just came, and we have more than 20 Israeli companies dealing with it today, is IoT, Internet of Things. As a matter of fact, when I visited most of these companies, I found out that it is another name for OT, because most of them are speaking to the manufacturers of the ICIS and all the others. So it's, now you have more competitors to those of you who are dealing with it. So, without further ado, just to make it quick, so we will not finish as I promised some other people here at 10 p.m. I do recommend that first of all, please talk to the mics, because it will be much easier, and otherwise there will be a lot of noise. And in order to make sure that we know who you are, and I want to save time, please present yourself. And do it any way you want. Meaning, don't look at the stopper, just make sure that you present yourself, because I think it is very important. It is also a great honor for all of us that you made the time to come all the way. How many hours did you have to fly? Long time? Long time from the Japan. So next time, maybe we'll come to see you. So most of the people did the very special arrangements and very special coming here today. And you see the people who are here, and the audience would be able to ask questions. So I'm looking at you and I know who is going to ask the question. Will be the first one. Be prepared. I'm not going to read whatever we wrote because all the questions are already with the panelists and you have it as well. I just remember us that we will discuss what are the criteria for your countries, use and define critical infrastructure. Also, let's look at this at the private business. Are you a critical infrastructure? Are you dealing with critical infrastructure? What is your ideas about it? Is it state definition, sector definition, or is it something else? How do we approach risk analysis, the role of the government? All these questions are going to be dealt today. So without further ado, I'm going to start from the beginning, and I will start with our main host, Aviram Bachar. Let's hear about what's really going on in Israel and how do you identify national critical infrastructure. If you want, you can come here if the microphone is not fine. If it's not working, it's just a cyber attack, so you know how to deal with it. Hello? If not, Aviram, let's save time. No, Boina, it's working here.
I think now this one works.
Luckily, Minister Okonski is here.
As I said before, my name is Aviram. I'm the head of Department of Critical Infrastructure in Israel, in INCD. Well, we approach the main issues by guiding infrastructures. We publish 9 reasons why to do it. I will be focusing only on 5, basically the main topics. The first one is human life. If there's a cyber breach in a critical infrastructure that can cause the death of few dozen peoples, this infrastructure will be on our guidance. Second point is if it's a public service, necessarily public service to the people in Israel, it will get also in the list. The third thing is the opportunity of the government to ability to govern. The fourth point is the loss of 500 million shekels. It's approximately more than $150 million in a cyber attack. And the fifth one is the ability to be service in a critical situation in Israel. If there is any critical situation in Israel and there is infrastructure that support the ability of Israel to obtain this issue, this infrastructure will be also called a critical infrastructure. And we will guide it also.
So what, first of all, it's the first time that I know really what you are doing because it was so sensitive in Israel till today. And I think it's very important to learn from it. But please remember one thing before I'm going to the second speaker. We are speaking about Israel. Each country should identify what is their national critical infrastructure. What we give you is the main guidelines that we are doing in Israel. And for the first time, we are sharing it with you. And for the partners of the INCD, those who are coming from overseas, this is a great chance. And if you didn't write everything, please find Aviram later, and I believe that he will be able to give you more information. And we will ask him some questions later. Please, the next speaker, please. Please present yourself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dimitris Vergis. I am based in Greece. I work for a company named Splunk. I've dealt with a lot of critical infrastructure is more from the security aspect of it, trying to help them secure the infrastructure, especially since we're in a world nowadays that a lot of OT networks are going more digital from analog. So for Greece, unfortunately, maybe fortunately for some people that work for those infrastructures, that we don't have a government entity that regulates these things. But what happens is for a lot of private entities owned like energy or telcos, they actually develop their own kind of policies and procedures to be able to defend against such situations as well. But the definition that they usually create is that a critical infrastructure for Greece especially is any type of infrastructure that if it goes down or happens to threats, which could be attacks, could be terrorist attacks, for example, it could be natural disasters, it will cause a lot of problems and a huge loss in the economy and social and health of that nation.
Yossi Schneck is heading the cyber for many years in IEC, so if you want to know a real guy who knows what a controller looks like, not theoretically only, is the guy. Yossi, please.
Okay, thank you, Rami. So I don't have to present myself. Rami did it already. So I'm just representing actually the stakeholder here. So I want to compete with my friends from the National Directorate. And I will twist a little bit the question to what is happening and what is concerning us that, in our opinion, needs a little bit change or alignment of the definition of critical infrastructure. So actually we see two main occurrences, witnessing two main occurrences that should bring to a change in this definition. One is actually amazing penetration of computerized system to almost all of our life processes. It's not only utilities or infrastructure, all our processes are actually computerized, and because of it, many of them are turning to be critical. Okay, even if I take the formal measures of our regulator, I have to be very careful here because all my regulators are sitting here. So, but if I take them, all these measures are suddenly in interest or influential or many others domains that yesterday were not critical. So this is one thing. The second thing is actually, I call it interdependence. We are more and more, and it's not from today, but it's growing more and more, dependent on many supply chain entities that actually can influence our criticality without them being critical. So again, it enlarges the big surface of definitions that we should take when we are talking about critical. So I ask you a simple question that I know the answer if I would ask it a few years ago. Are the dairies in your country critical infrastructure, yes or no? And I think that today, with some change, even though maybe they don't endanger immediately the parameters that were talking here by Aviram, they are critical infrastructure yet, because actually they are based on super computerized systems. They are one of the attack surfaces that are possible to be attacked. And I think all the definition of critical infrastructure everywhere should have some change or new alignment what we are talking about and who is actually critical infrastructure.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Jefferson Nassif. I work for the Presidency of the Republic in Brazil, specifically in the Department of Information Security, which is the department responsible for cyber affairs in my country. Well, actually, we have last year defined what critical infrastructure is. Actually, it was by decree, but before this decree last year, we've been working on some kind of definition, basically based on international best practices, basically on NIST, in which we provided some elements. Well, and it defines that critical infrastructure are the facilities, services, goods, and systems whose total or partial disruption or destruction will have a serious impact on social, environmental, economic, political, international, or state and society security. It's basically, as you can see, the NIST definition for it. And then we defined 5 critical infrastructure: energy, transportation, water, telecommunication, and finance. The policy envisages the creation of a specific strategy, a plan, an integrated system for critical infrastructure, because of the interdependence, as my previous colleague just said, but they are all being developed right now. Well, the policy recognizes the occurrence of interdependencies among the critical infrastructure, but unfortunately there is no obligation to, at least not yet, to notify. And it doesn't mention the relationship very specifically with sector regulators, but at least it fosters the cooperation between private and public sectors.
Later I'm going to ask you, after you heard Mr. Bachar and the Israeli criteria, whether you think that you should make any changes. And now, before going to the First Lady here, she's coming from the UK, I'll tell you something in a very special Israeli way. When you are going in Israel to a theater, usually you go to the restrooms, you find out that there's a big queue for the ladies. And there is a small queue for men. When if you did it today, you found out that you had to wait, I don't know, 10 minutes just for the men. It means that we don't have enough ladies dealing with cyber. And I'm very proud that we have in our panel 1, 2, 3, 4 ladies. Let's get them, and let's hope, really, honestly, that we will have much, much more of them. INCD is another example. They have so many ladies and some men. So, no, I'm just laughing. Franco, I'm still your friend. So let's go on. Please, Kate.
Thank you. Yes, I'm Catherine. I'm from DCMS, which is a digital policy department in the UK. So in the UK, critical national infrastructure, or CNI, is defined at the state level. And in our definition, we prioritise assets, systems, networks, processes, and facilities which deliver the most essential services in the UK. And the definition says relies on services which have a major detrimental impact on the availability, integrity, or delivery of essential services, where that might relate to significant loss of life, casualties, economic or social impacts, national security, defence, and functioning of the state. It's quite a mouthful. So in practice, what this means is that we define our critical national infrastructure in sectors, and we define 13 sectors which we consider to be critical national infrastructure. And when we consider them in a national risk assessment, and we look at the risks to that infrastructure as an aggregated whole across sectors, and we look at the cascading effects between sectors. So that is, an incident might start as only affecting the water sector, but then it might have a cascading effect in turn on the food sector. So we need to consider those cascading effects. Of course, so these sectors are primarily regulated by regulation which was in place before we considered CNI as a whole. So there is regulation that is specific to transport, but it's not necessarily cybersecurity specific, but it has an element of cybersecurity in it. Of course, as we are a member of the EU, in 2018, the EU NIS directive came in, the Network and Information Systems Security Directive, and that was transposed into UK legislation in 2018 into the NIS regulations. So those apply in the UK. They apply to 4 of those 13 sectors only, and that's because the definition that we've adopted from there talks about the detrimental effect to society and the economy. It's much more social and economy focused, and it's measured by things like parameters like the number of customers a service might work to, or its market share. In terms of the definition from the NIS, obviously there's the definition that's provided by the directive, but in terms of how we apply that in the UK, the identification thresholds of which service within a particular sector actually meets the definition is set by the sector in discussion with the competent authority. So for each sector, so for the transport sector, the lead government department or the regulator is normally the competent authority. And they have discussions with the sector about where the threshold sits for that sector, and that's the way that the definition is set.
Thank you very much. One of the most important role of the Israeli National Cyber Directorate is also to have the ICS cert, which is the critical infrastructure cert. For those of you who are coming from countries who doesn't have yet any coordination, any agreement with the Israeli cert, it's a good chance today, because maybe most of you are leaving tomorrow, hopefully on Sundays, and you enjoy. Yigal Una today, the head of the Israeli National Cyber Directorate, said that they are looking for much more cooperation. Let me tell it to you in a very Israeli way. It is much important for you to team together with the Israelis. Hopefully, we will be able to get a lot from you as well. Let's coordinate. The cooperation is a must. I believe that we will talk about it. Next speaker, please.
Okay, hello. My name is Georg Becker. I'm a security researcher at a think tank in Berlin for Germany. So my research is basically about securing infrastructure. So how do we define? We define everything in Germany after the law. So we have a lot of regulations. A long time ago, what is critical infrastructure? And the NIS directive is basically very similar to what Germany does. But one thing is, Germany was actually, I feel, pretty far ahead. In 2008, we had an IT security law that gave a lot of requirements to a national critical infrastructure when it comes to cybersecurity. So it means that you need to have, for example, a CISO, you need to respond within 3 days, you have to respond to incidents and tell the authorities that an incident happened. So for me as a security researcher, it's of course like, okay, identifying is one thing, so what does it mean if you are a critical infrastructure? For example, water supply is critical infrastructure in Germany, but they're usually run by the towns, have small companies that do that, and usually there are only like 2 or 3 IT guys working there. So if you now define a CISO, like one of 2 guys is like, okay, now I'm the CISO. So that's not very helpful, right? So they set a threshold that is sector dependent, that if you are critical infrastructure and you're above that threshold, then you have to comply to the IT security law, which I think makes a lot of sense, because only big companies can really handle the requirements that come with it. But it also leaves a little bit open, because in the attacks, if you now attack 500 small water supply companies, it's not much harder than attacking one large one. So just for food of thought, it's not just identifying it, but also finding the right measure to handle it.
Before asking Ms. Hila Meller to speak, Israel is a very unique country. And one of the, also for Israelis, I'm not sure that most of you would know it. First of all, the definition between IT and OT is no longer. IT and OT always now works together. Second, in Israel, in every ministry today, we have a special, in a very high level of Deputy of Director General, a special role done by this kind of people dealing with cyber security. Not anymore just IT, not anymore security, it's all together. We have it in the Ministry of Energy, we have it in the Ministry of Finance, we have it all over. And the most important thing that happened, we realized very quickly, and it's now being done for a long time, that we need to take some budget from the IT and take it to the cybersecurity, and I think it was taken about 7% from this budget. This is the secret of Israel. When I'm coming all over the world, I find out that in many countries, the man in charge of cyber is Minister of Communication, like in Romania, Minister of Digitalization. You know who is in charge in Israel? Prime Minister Netanyahu. That's a message. And he, of course, nominated Director General Yigal Una to lead it. But he's leading it under the Prime Minister, which means he is the one to coordinate, he is having the budget, he is looking at the whole picture, he's the one. And this is very unique. I know maybe it is a very Israeli way, but I think this is really a working way to do things. And INCD, I think, is doing really miracles. I'm not there anymore, so I can say whatever I want, but really they are doing miracles. And I want just to ask you, have any one of you visited Beersheba, the cyberspark? Not those who wanted to see camels in Beersheba. I mean people who visited the CERT. Yes? Very good. I'm very happy. You know, for Israelis to go to Beersheba, it's a trip. I have to check my car before, etc. 40 minutes drive. It's not easy. Okay, Hila Meller. Hila Meller is coming from BT, British Telecom. And before you are going to present yourself, I wanted also to ask you whether British Telecom is also identified as a critical infrastructure in the UK.
Yes, we
If
do,
you can
right?
answer.
Yeah, of course, yes.
Please, go on.
Yeah, okay, so, yeah, thank you all. Hila Meller, I am the Vice President managing BT Security in Europe. BT, for those of you that don't know, we are a mobile network operator in the UK, but we also have a very wide global business. We provide network and telecommunication services in 180 countries. So yes, we are critical infrastructure in the UK, but also in some other countries around the world. So I manage Europe, right, for BT Security, and when I got myself prepared for this session today, I had a chat with Ram and told him, oh, I have so many countries. You asked me about the country. I have so many countries, and I have the EU. Some of the countries are in the EU. Some other countries are not the EU. Some of them for now are in the EU, might not be there. So he said, you know what, just answer what you want to answer. And I think that the right thing to do, also after listening to my peers here, is to talk about the NIS directive. It's the EU directive. NIS, by the way, is Security for Network and Information Systems. And it provides some clear definition of what are, they don't call it critical infrastructure, okay? They call it providers of essential services. This is the definition that is used in the NIS directive. And it's pretty clear, and I'll get to that. So the directive was published in 2016, and by the end of 2018, all member states were asked to identify those entities that are essential services providers and report back. And also initiate and put some controls in place, CERT and some other controls. So they also, the directive also, like so many other things with the EU, it leaves enough space for local adaptation by the different member states. So as you've heard from my peer here, Catherine, 13 sectors in the UK, and in Germany, what was it? Do you remember? So you'll see that the directive of the EU talks about 7 sectors, okay? And then if I look at how the French adopted it, they have 13 or 12 and 200 companies. So every country had its own way of adapting it and then deploying it in its own country. So let's go back to the NIS directive. So they have some very specific categories that they use. So the number 1 says that the service should be essential to social and economical activities. It should rely on network and information systems. And an incident will have a disruptive effect. What does that mean, right? How can you tell if it's a disruptive effect? But how do you measure that? So they're talking about the number of users that will be impacted. They're talking about the market share, dependency of other sectors. They're talking about impact on society, on public safety, on economy, geographical spread. Will it hit more than one country, for example? And also, are there any available alternatives? Could be maybe a small scale, but there are no other alternatives. They don't talk about this, the money. They don't talk about, I think in Israel they mentioned, and that surprised me because that's not included in the EU directive. No, they don't talk about, they don't quantify the loss, no. And then they also provide a list, Appendix 2. Appendix 2 is really important in the NIS directive because Appendix 2 gives a clear list of sectors and subsectors. And so you have the energy sector with electricity, oil and gas. You have the transport sector with air transport, rail, water transport and road transport, banking, financial infrastructure, for example, stock exchange trading, that will be a real damage if they don't work, health, drinking water, and digital infrastructure, internet providers, DNS providers. And they also realize that in some sectors, for example, air transport, there will be a mixed situation. An airport might be critical infrastructure or essential service. The shopping area in the airport is not. Well, to me it is. To me it is, but for the nation it's not, right? And they also realize that in some sectors, the sector itself will already have standards and rules that could be more severe than the directive itself, and so they apply lex specialis, which is a Latin word that says we apply a specific law in this specific case, and they specifically manage the banking sector and the water supply system as sectors where their own sectorial standards tend to be more severe than the directive. So I hope that was clear.
Great, thank you very much. Mr. Yigal Luna today in his speech, how many of you heard the Prime Minister? Oh, you were lucky. And Yigal Luna? One of the things that Yigal mentioned is the supply chain security. I'm very proud to say that I heard that the first course on cybersecurity for supply chain was already conducted by the Israeli National Cyber Directorate. I'm very proud about it because this was the way also to certify the right people how to start dealing with it. And of course, it's as an awareness. We're coming now to Mr. Karol Okonski from Poland, a good friend who came also especially. He's in charge of the cyber as well. And we are very proud that you are here, sir, together with all the others. Please.
Yes, hello. Very nice to be here. My name is Karol Okonski. I'm Secretary of State in Ministry of Digital Affairs, so basically like a deputy minister in the ministry. There's actually its role is to foster and coordinate the digital agenda in Poland. At the same time, parallelly, I'm also the government plenipotentiary for cybersecurity, coordinating both, let's say, the civilian, military, and public part of the cybersecurity, also including the CSIRTs or the CERTs for the security incidents handling. And now, the NIS directive has already been mentioned 3 times. So, you know, Poland being member of EU, of course, was also under the force of this directive. Also, we have implemented this. So, we will not speak about the details, although we have taken a slightly different approach, because for us, the most important thing was actually to do it in the most effective way, and to, let's say, to keep and make the best use of what has already been in place in Poland. So we have kept actually the 2 orders that have some common ground but are still separate. So we have the list of what was mentioned, the new list of essential services providers, and we have the list of critical infrastructure objects or operators. Now, the critical infrastructure, of course, was in place for a long time and still is. This concentrates actually both on real and cyber objects, installations, devices that actually that are necessary to maintain the continuity of country economy and the security of the state. Now, the specific criteria in Poland for critical infrastructure, and actually the list of objects is classified, so I will not be able to speak about the details. The number is more or less, this is like it's what I can say, for the country that has a size of Poland, so like around 40 million people, is around 250. These are the list of the number of items, let's say, on the critical infrastructure list. Now, for the essential services providers, we estimate, because we are still in the process of actually not really identifying but formalizing, let's say, the decisions around being part of this new group. We estimate to have around 450, more or less. Now, as for the essential services providers, you come up and you end up on this list when your facility in your system actually requires the ICT, the system, the IT system, to maintain the services that you provide. Now, for the critical infrastructure, the objects that are also part of this, also the ones that do not require the IT. That you may actually think, actually everything now requires IT, and for most of the systems, to actually mean that they are on the both of the lists. But you still, in the critical infrastructure, you might also find some things like bridges, for example. Definitely, some concrete structure that has to be maintained in order to have the transportation in the critical paths within Poland. But actually, what we see, what will probably be, let's say, the version 2.0 of our legal act, would be of unifying the both lists, because of course, with the ICT being more evident and more popular in more places, this list will eventually become more or less the same. Now, the other difference that we still maintain is that the critical infrastructure in Poland is actually governed, supervised by a dedicated agency called the Government Center for Security, whereas for the security incidents, the entities report the incidents to another agency, Internal Security Agency, ABW in Poland. So there is also a strict, clear responsibility, but like there are two different bodies that are linked to this. And what we are also right now doing is that we also see that, that we are cooperating with the other ministry that is in charge of this of the critical infrastructure, is also to make sure that at the moment, which is specifically true for computer systems, and I would be also interested to know like how it is in other countries. But in Poland, you actually become a part of a critical infrastructure after you actually construct, build, deploy the system. So in the end, it has some consequences on, for example, on the build process, on the also the public procurement process, that you will actually, when the future critical infrastructure is under construction, you cannot apply yet the rules that are actually then specific for critical infrastructure. This is something that we identified basically to be changed, so that the process of designing and implementing, you should from the very beginning know, you can actually simulate, or even make the preliminary decision that given object will become part of a critical infrastructure, and then apply from the very beginning the specific measures. And the last thing to mention is that we have like biannual mandatory assessment of national critical infrastructure, and also along with this the national crisis management plans. But at the same time, what we also have identified is to make sure that the same, let's say, risk management methodology and approach is used, especially for IT systems. And this is actually my also personal responsibility within the next term, the next time, to make sure that we have the unified, consistent approach here. Because what we have also learned is that if we leave this risk assessment too much as a responsibility of given ministry or given entity, the results can actually in the end become very can come up very different. Thank you.
Mr. Okonski, I can tell you, you said that some of the things are sensitive. Don't worry, in Israel everything is sensitive. You know that about 28 companies that were identified as critical infrastructure in 2002, nobody even knew who are these companies until about 2012. And even now, I'm not sure that all the publications are correct, so you are in the good family together with us. And thank you very much for coming. By the way, we have two politicians here that are speaking like businessmen because they came from business. You heard it and you understand it, and we'll hear it as well. The next speaker, please.
Hi. I'm Bob Kolaski. I'm the director of the National Risk Management Center in the Department of Homeland Security, and we have the responsibility for coordinating strategic national risk management across the critical infrastructures, largely focused on cybersecurity at this point. Definitionally, at this point, there's not much more to add. Kind of in the nuance, there's some nuances in how we define critical infrastructure legislatively in our sectors. We have 16 sectors, vice 13 sectors. We use slightly different words in our legislation, but I think it's pretty consistent with what we heard, particularly what I heard from the UK. What we've done recently that I'd like to highlight is based on the structure that we built out of defining critical infrastructure in terms of sectors and thresholds. We've started to think about, from a risk management perspective, what are the most critical functions that those critical infrastructure produce, and how do we neck down what is a relatively broad definition to allow for a lot of information sharing into a prioritization schema for the purpose of managing risk. And I think we've landed on the idea that functions are the right way to think about how risk actually shows up across the system. And so about a month and a half ago, we published for the first time a list of 55 national critical functions that are the things produced from critical infrastructure that, if undermined, will have a deleterious negative impact on our national security, on our national economic security, on public safety, life loss, or on our ability to or on, a community and our ability to be a strong country. And so we publish these publicly, no information caveats. They're relatively uncontroversial things: generate electricity, transmit electricity, distribute electricity, which Max can certainly talk about, move people and commodities by air, move people and commodities by rail, operate core liquidity services, provide insurance services, identity management, conduct of elections. That's kind of the level the national critical functions are. What that has allowed us to do is start to break those functions down into actually how they're produced for the purpose of managing risk, and get past, get at some of the interdependency issues that have been identified. And so among the ways we're going to use the national critical functions are to further build out what I call a risk architecture, which gets to the sub-function level, to understand, the elements that go into generating electricity or conducting elections or providing identity management services. What are the key components? What are the critical technologies that enable that to happen? What other things have to happen, get to some of the dependencies, interdependencies, and really map out the architecture of how a critical function is produced. And then we can use that architecture to prioritize against a range of risks. If you care about something happening, can a cyber attack at scale cause the function to degrade to a level that it should be a national security emergency? What would that scenario look like, and how would that play out? So we're building out the architecture, but then we're also using these functions to do things like prioritize incident management after a natural disaster hits. We've got to make sure that these national functions are up and running for communities, for life safety and life sustaining activities. It will help us prioritize how we collect intelligence information to inform our risk management judgments. It helps to start to define kind of some of our national security decision making. For example, we really don't want foreign investment from countries we can't trust in areas that would allow for too much control of a national critical function. And so we have legislation that defines where foreign investment is allowed and where it isn't, and where there might be restrictions on it, particularly from foreign investment from companies that we may not trust. And we're connecting the dots between this across a whole risk management architecture. And I've been doing this for a long time, and I think this will be the first time that we fully have not just a policy environment of critical infrastructure, but a risk architecture that then can be used to support a full range of decision making. Cybersecurity's really brought us in this direction. This was called for an international cyber strategy to develop this, because cyber has really got us thinking about what is the end impact of a cyber attack that we need to care about, because we can't just care about every cyber attack. There are too many of them. I want to know they're happening, but I want at a national security level to only care about the things that will degrade functions. No reason that same thinking doesn't go across a full range of potential hazard scenarios, but cyber's really put it together. And I think it's allowed us to put together new partnerships and new plans to make us more robust as a country. So, it's an exciting time to really pull this out and better understand how we can use this critical infrastructure frame to get to the most critical things to actually manage risk across the country.
Thank you very much, Bob. Is there anybody who is from this business who doesn't look at the information coming from ICIS daily? I do recommend you to do it. ICIS CERT is amazing. It is focusing on the OT business, And I think, by the way, I don't know whether the new guys in the directorate knows it, but when we started the idea of having a sectorial cert on energy, which was the first one, we took this idea together with you from the ICIS and the others, and now it became a big success, and we'll talk about it. So thank you very much. United States is our best ally, as you know, but all of you are the same. And I didn't mention today, Mr. Okonski, maybe I didn't see the Polish flag while Igal was speaking about the cooperation. It was there, but we have here the gentleman who is heading the Polish CERT, I think, as well, and NASC, which is having it as well. So it's very important. And one of the ideas for you who are sitting here is to know who are the players in this business. I asked myself why I should do my PhD now about critical infrastructure. I just did these people and I finish it in half a year, and that's it. Great, thank you very much. Mr. Popovic, please.
Thank you. We have a law concerning critical infrastructure in Serbia. It's practically whole in accordance with the European Union legislation, standards. Practically, I think that Mr. Okoski said the most of that, what is usually in the most EU countries the same in legislation. But I also think that, that there is several points which we need to mention to the people also, and we have also in legislative procedures sometimes maybe critical moments, because for as far as I understand, and in my opinion, utilities are the most critical, I would say, the point. And SCADA systems, or over the SCADA, the distribution management systems, are, I would say, the key points for attacks tomorrow. So building the new totally digitalized distribution management systems, actually we have a cooperation with the Schneider Electric from France. They have a huge R&D center in Serbia for the utilities, for DMS, for distribution management system, and most of that actually they are one of the best and influent. I would say one of the key players for the utilities all over the world. They have it from the UK, from the USA, from other countries, and but sometimes if we are in the utilities, sometimes utilities, because of the procurement procedures, they bring decisions made sometimes, very often, on the lowest price. They choose the equipment, the SCADA systems, distribution management systems, which are probably sometimes, I mean, it's accordance to the, especially in the EU, based on the price. But sometimes people forget the threats which are in front of us, that nobody evaluate those threats sometimes, I would say, on proper way. So when we speak about critical infrastructure, we need to speak about the result which we want to get, and to have it safely. And of course, the cyber and all these I would say potential attacks should change a bit the mindset of making decision, buying the equipment, and I would say digitalize the softwares and everything concerning the take into consideration always the critical infrastructure and the threats which you can get from that. I would say that especially we need to speak that, about that in the government, but also I think it's very important that on the STEM faculties, kids get much more knowledge about these threats, especially, I mean, on the STEM faculties. Sometimes we discussed just before this conference that not so many the master degrees the bachelor degrees or PhD degrees are in our faculties, which are excellent, and we get excellent engineers, but sometimes we forget about the cyber and about the critical infrastructure. And I think that I would say again, as in the cyber, we have the state, we have the academic area, and we have business. I think again, we again come to the same point, always starting point. It's always joint cooperation about that, and everyone's support and I would say deep work in this area is crucial, because separate attitude will not bring the results, just joint results. And also on top of that, we brought law in the Serbia, but in the law, probably that's the same in Poland, we speak about also European infrastructure. If there are two neighboring countries around, which are from EU, you are already speaking not about your critical infrastructure, you're speaking about European critical infrastructure. So I think that it's very important all the time to have the joint cooperation on this very, very important issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Before coming to Biljana, I'm very proud to recognize a lady who has who had till now a very important role in the Bank of Israel. She was leading the cyber for many years. I'm very proud to see you here, Rocha Rachel Yacovi. Let's everybody see you. You see a lady sitting next to about 50 men every week, and they are doing exactly what she is saying. So thank you very much for your service. And now, who is in this room has a title of CISSP? Shuki? You? Great. Biljana came especially from Croatia. She's from ISC Square. And maybe you explain a little bit what is CISSP so people will understand why we decided in Israel to certify people. One of the biggest success of the Israeli National Cyber Directorate is the way that we start to certify people. Not anybody can say, I'm the best of the best, I just came and I was in the best unit in the intelligence and I give you a best prize. That's not enough. You need to come out with a certification. And in top-level cybersecurity, I believe that they will also ask for a security clearance. So certification is a must. Biljana Serin, thank you for coming.
Thank you, Rami, for the invitation, and I'm very happy to be here at this great conference. I'm a member of the board of the ICIS Squared, which is International Information System Security Certification Consortium. We have 140,000 members worldwide, and we are trying to bring this organization closer to every country, so that we really emphasize that international. I believe many of you who do have CISSPs are actually US citizens, because this still is quite a US-centered organization. However, I'm now in the board, I'm from Croatia, unfortunately the only one from the EMEA region. However, we hope to have more members from other regions, and hopefully maybe we will have a good candidate from Israel as well. My role is to try to explain how important it is to have good experts dealing with all those things that we are talking about here. I wouldn't say certification is a must. Many companies invest into certifications. They emphasize importance of that. They encourage the people to go for these certifications. However, having a certification, in my personal opinion, although I'm with IC Squared, it primarily means you are a dedicated expert. You want to learn more. You want to keep in touch with the industry. You have to maintain your certification. That means you're not just supposed to pass the exam and then study no longer. In cyber industry, we don't have that luxury. We must be always one step ahead, but we are always one step behind, unfortunately. So I really invite all of you to look at what IC Squared is doing. We also have great conferences worldwide. The next one is happening in Orlando in October, and it's going to be in Walt Disney Resort, which may attract a little bit more people.
What is the date? No, we need to arrange the tickets.
Yeah, sure. It's really a great conference. I believe we'll have 5,000 attendees this year.
We have many of those secure summits happening worldwide. The next one is, I think, is in Singapore, quite close to Japan as well. And what I like about ICIS² is that all these things really matter to us, and we are really passionate about what we are doing and the way we are trying to help organizations. However, I have to admit, when I look at the government side of the story, you guys are just waiting for the laws to be written in order to do something. This is not the way business operates. I have my own consulting company, which is established in Croatia, in UK, and in USA. We've been providing risk assessment and management services to large companies like Amgen, Biotech in Los Angeles, Stanford University, MGM Resorts International, which has 70,000 employees. These companies assess risk, manage risk on a daily basis because they want their businesses to be secure. And we are here talking about safety, about people, about health issues, food, water supply, energy. In Croatia, we selected 11 sectors based on those directives, and one of the sectors, I may understand why, but one of them is even protecting national monuments as being a part of critical national infrastructure. What's happening now, we are making those next law-based directives and decisions on how to do risk assessment. Do we need a law on how to do a risk assessment? There are so many methodologies published worldwide, and these methodologies are quite useful, and you are free to adopt them to your own environment. And as a result of that, we are seeing now public tenders coming out where government companies are inviting private companies to run for a tender of providing a risk assessment service for them. When you look at the expected price of the service, let's say it's approximately the same importance of the government organizations. They range from 200,000 kunas, which is the easiest way because it's a small tender, up to 2 million kunas for pretty much the same service and the same scope of the service. Something is obviously wrong here. What I believe is wrong, people working in those government institutions need experts. These experts are hard to find. We are really aware of the skill gap. We do not have enough cybersecurity experts. People that want to work for the government, they may have some reasons, but salaries in the government sectors are not that high. And these people are much, in a better position to find a much better paid and probably much more interesting job somewhere else. So I think that there needs to be something different than in that world. That's my question to all of you. And the way I see a solution, that's of course private government partnership. I'm here also on behalf of Croatian Chamber of Commerce, where I lead affiliation of cybersecurity companies in Croatia. We have a number of these companies in Croatia, not a big number, but they are really successful because behind them are really passionate people who have really good education, similar as in Serbia. We still keep that education really important in our region, and we provide our services worldwide. What we wanted to find out in Israel, and thank you, Rami, for that, is how did Israel do it? How did you support your companies, and how did you enable them to become so successful? And I hope we will also map some of these experiences in Croatia.
Thank you, Biljana. We are not going to tell you everything we are doing in Israel, otherwise we will have competition, so we have to do it in the right way, slowly, slowly. Please, sir.
I'm Max Everett. I'm the Chief Information Officer for the Department of Energy in the United States. So we have a role, we're what's called a sector-specific agency. We've got a role, we work in coordination with our colleagues at Department of Homeland Security, and we have a role specific to the energy sector at large in the U.S. on trying to make sure that it's resilient and protected. And I think we've already heard some talk about how we look at that. I'll maybe add a couple of the practical things that we're trying to go through and think about as we look at our role in protecting energy. One of the challenges we've seen, certainly I saw when I walked in the department, was when we talk about critical infrastructure, and I think people have hit this in various ways, we tend to boil the ocean. We tend to, we walked in and essentially, the answer was, what's critical? Well, it was the entire energy sector. Well, that's a little hard to scope, even for the U.S. And so we wanted to take the step back and understand, you've got to be able to scope that appropriately and understand what's actually critical, right? What's really the critical things you need to do. The second part of that, of course, is our focus, cyber or physical, either way, is resilience, right? It's not perfection, it's about resilience. So as we look at the energy sector, we've tried to take the step back and look at what are the most important functions that we're trying to protect. And Bob alluded to some of that, I think, methodology, but we got into a little bit of the practical of what do we need to maintain the base load, keep our grid going? What would we need to do a black start? What are those functional things that we need to do, again, for a resilient energy sector? Of course, and you mentioned supply chain. Understanding what are the critical pieces if we lost a large transformer. How quickly could we get a new large transformer? Those are some of the practical questions that we've, I think, tried to do. And that would lead me to my only other point, which is I think sometimes when we talk about this from a large policy perspective, we don't always ask those practical questions. And again, as we went through this, we tried to think about critical path from both the top and the bottom. And what I mean by that is, I'll give an example. Early on when I got to the department, we were dealing with a supply chain issue around a particular piece of software. And we were talking to the people who use it, and they were explaining how they couldn't conduct their business, their mission would fail if they weren't allowed to use this piece of software. Well, we asked them, because they had gone through an assessment before and had been asked to identify, well, what's critical to doing your function? And we pointed out that this software hadn't been put on the list, and a person looks back with a straight face and says, well, the software is not critical, but the output is. And it was sort of this lack of understanding, probably on both sides, as we tried to understand and help them understand what we were asking when we're trying to look at all these critical functions and that critical path. And so I think sometimes we need to do a bit better job of looking at those practical questions. When we think about electricity, I've asked people before we talk to them, how many people in this room right now have enough shekels in your pocket, enough food at your house, enough gas in your car that you could go the next 5 days without any access to an ATM or credit card machine and get by? And I'm going to guess the answer is probably not very many people. So from a very practical perspective, a very basic life perspective, what does that mean for people, and what are the functions you need to do those things? Just asking people sometimes those, even so our leadership, asking them those very basic questions starts to lead them down the path of understanding, well, if the power was out for 5 days, if our telecom network was out for 5 days, which meant the ATMs and credit card machines wouldn't work, what would life look like? And it starts to paint a picture for people who may not be technical, but it quickly starts to help them understand what we actually mean when we say what's critical and what's not. We don't need the roller coaster and the water slide to work. We can get by. But we sure need, when most of us are going to need the ATM, we're going to need the gas station. So helping people think through that has been one of the things that's helped us get leadership. And of course, in the U.S., almost all of our sector is privately held. So they understand from their particular business perspective, but from a broader national resilience perspective, we're trying to help them think more broadly. And as the minister pointed out, none of us are isolated, certainly not in energy. We're dependent on Canada and Mexico in many cases for helping to balance our grid, and they're dependent on us just as well. And so many of these questions, certainly with telecommunications, they are global questions. There is none of us, not even the United States, that is an island in these regards. And so that's why forums like this are actually extremely important for all of us.
Thank you very much, Max. Amazing. Before we are coming to Nir, when we started at 2012, if we would have done such a panel, believe me, I would not find a lot of people to deal with it unless Yossi Schneck. And in most countries that I have already been, and speaking about SCADA, OT, IoT, people were looking at me as crazy. The only question was, of course, who did Stuxnet, which I usually look at these people and say, I believe that you did it because you are very smart. But this also created a lot, not only of noise, but of awareness. And I believe that we will speak about awareness. Nir is coming from Checkpoint, and you will present yourself. It's very important to realize what's really you are doing on this field, but also how do you feel about critical infrastructure?
Hi, my name is Nir Naaman. I head the development of government and defense products at Checkpoint. Checkpoint is a leader in information security, so it's a product and services vendor operating worldwide for over 25 years. I have not been at Checkpoint for 25 years. I've been there for 6 years. Doing various roles. I'm proud to be a CSSP. I'm actually going to build on a lot of the things that my colleagues here have spoken about, and talk about how we as a global vendor of information security see changes in how governments and people consider the security of the critical infrastructure. And some of the things that have been said here is that typically the definition of what is a critical infrastructure, it is something that if it is disrupted, so if its availability or integrity is impacted, or typically even if trust is lost. So it might not have to be, you know, if people believe that the banking system is collapsing, even if it isn't, then that could cause a major disruption to society, to the nation, to the common good. And so one of the things that we are seeing happening is a change. Checkpoint has been active for many years in securing, in helping organizations, enterprises, secure themselves, providing products and services. And I think that something that we see happening today, and therefore we are, of course, targeting that change, is that we are seeing a lot of governments thinking about a common defense. So not just make each individual power station or each individual bank protect itself, maybe help them, maybe guide them, but also think about tomorrow, what happens when a cyber war breaks out. It could be limited war, because today not all wars are you know, World War III, but we are seeing today attacks against an entire industry sector, or attacks that are aimed not just to impact a single organization, but society in general. And therefore we are seeing governments and industry sectors and so very large organizations. You know, we often think of British Telecom. British Telecom in many ways is like this country. In terms of the scope, in terms of the services, in terms of their resources, and also in terms of the advantage to an attacker in disrupting. You know, just if we just take out BT, what does that do to society? It's actually a significant impact. So we see governmental bodies, we see non-governmental bodies that are thinking of how can we tackle this question of a common defense. And that is not just regulation, it's actually the ability to work together collaboratively inside specific sectors like finance or energy, etc. When an attack happens, how do we do detection and analysis and response and recovery, and resilience is a key word here. So how can we operate in the face of attack? Because attacks are happening today all the time, and we see that happening, and this is a big change. When I started in information security almost 30 years ago, typically I was the danger. So I would walk the corridors and people would say, wait, is there a red team exercise? And they would go to their screens and see. And today, they don't need that, because we are talking about assumed breach. And again, this is a change, because in the beginning, attackers were going after the low-hanging fruit, the IT systems, the desktop, the information system. And today, they are seeing a lot of advantage in going after the rest of the information system, and that goes to SCADA systems, to IoT, to all of that. So these are changes that we're seeing, and I think that that also affects the way that different societies, different governments define what is critical.
No doubt that we are not speaking anymore, I hope so, about separated networks. Try to go to your separated network and check it, and you will find out that sometimes it is also connected to 2-3 clouds, which is a big surprise and a big threat as well. And now we have a great chance to have a very special lady with us, Mihoko Matsubara. She is the Chief Strategist of NTT, but you will present yourself better. It's so important to understand what's really going on in Japan and how you are taking part.
Okay. Hello. Shalom. Also, I really appreciate Cyber Week brought me back here again, and I really appreciate to be here, and it's nice to see you again, Rami. So I'm a chief cybersecurity strategist for NTT Corporation, which is a major global ICT service provider based in Tokyo, and then we have presence in over 180 countries. So in Japan, critical infrastructure definition is based upon a state definition. So I'm so encouraged to hear that we have so many similarities in different countries' definitions for the critical infrastructure. So in Japanese definition, critical infrastructure means that it's the foundation of citizens' daily lives and also socio-economic activities. So what I mean by that is if any of the 14 critical infrastructure sectors services are disrupted or suspended by any cause, including cyber attacks or natural disasters, it will cause a huge impact or disruptions to our socio-economic activities or even to our daily lives. And Rami mentioned about the importance of public-private partnerships, and the Japanese government and the industry take it really seriously, because under the 2014 Basic Act for cybersecurity, Japanese government decided to put cybersecurity strategy headquarters underneath the national cabinet. And so the headquarters for cybersecurity strategy actually consist of not just by governmental ministers, so including foreign ministers and defense ministers, but also consist of industry representatives and also academic representatives. So they have 8 members from non-governmental entities. So 4 members are actually from industry, and 4 members are from universities and academia. So that way, they can have a good public, private, and also academic partnerships to make sure that we have a good resiliency for the protection of critical infrastructure.
Arigatou gozaimasu. And now we have a very special guest. Listen, we have to be careful. So next to you will speak only Serbian. So you don't understand? Fine. Okay. Roberto.
So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Rami, for inviting me to this panel. My name is Roberto Minicucci. I'm responsible at Baker Hughes CG company for cybersecurity of products, services, which we deliver to our customers, and the OT security of our plants. So Baker Hughes, maybe you haven't heard about them. It's basically 65,000 employees company, and it is active in producing oil and gas equipment, services, and software. So in a nutshell, we are not directly impacted by, let's say, we are not critical infrastructure. Our customers may be, because there may be national oil companies and other operators which may provide such services. So I had prepared some points to talk about. I can basically forget about this now because everything has already been said. So I just try to add a few things on that. About Italy, because one of the hubs of Baker Hughes is in Italy. And the situation there has been driven mostly by the NIS directive. It has helped to a great extent to frame, to define a national framework for cybersecurity space and relevant action plans. So to define a CSERT, to define authorities, point of contacts towards EU. The model is compared to what's been done in other northern countries. Europe is more decentralized. So there are different authorities taking care of the different verticals, if you want, energy, transport, banking, and so forth, so on. Other notes, mostly we spoke about critical infrastructure after 2008 when there was the first directive on critical infrastructure. It has not been acted upon too much, but with the NIS, we have been start talking about operators of essential services and digital service providers. So there's been an identification of something like 465 operators of digital essential services. Criteria, the list is not public. Criteria is not public as well. I mean, the thresholds, we know that they're basically similar to the sectorial and cross-cutting criteria, which were initially in the directive from 2008, but it's not public. And maybe there are some pros and cons to this, but I think that the best effect of the NIS directive was that it actually drove an acceleration towards creating this national architecture and these operating plans.
Amazing. Thank you very much. We are now going to the last but not least. Juan Torres, who is Associate Laboratory Director, Energy System Integration from NREL. Please, sir.
Thank you, Rami. If you don't mind, I'm gonna stand just because I can't see everybody over here.
Okay, that's good.
So thank you for having me here. Maybe I'll start a little bit before I go into what is NREL doing in this space, and we're mostly focused on research and development. And NREL, National Renewable Energy Laboratory, is one of 17 national laboratories in the U.S. Department of Energy, working closely with MAX, and we support DHS and some of the other agencies in the U.S. I'm one of the old guys working in critical infrastructure. I've been in the lab system there almost 29 years. And so in about 1996 is when the U.S. really started to develop its modern concept of critical infrastructure protection. And I got involved around that time. And what we've seen is we've gone from identifying, just starting with 6 critical infrastructures in the U.S. is what we started with. And now it's expanded to 16. And that's just to get an understanding and a handle of what currently exists. So within the national laboratories, what we're doing is trying to figure out how do we set a trajectory for our future infrastructure. So right now we are spending a lot of time on figuring out how do you protect and add more resilience, as Max mentioned, which is very important, to the existing infrastructure, because bad things are going to happen. So how do we more intentionally design a resilient infrastructure as opposed to where we are today, which is where infrastructure just kind of evolved, many times just based on economics, what's convenient, what's efficient, but not necessarily having thought through security, and especially now with new technologies like digital technologies, computer age, that are integrating, interconnecting everything. So in addition to that, what we've done essentially is increased our attack surface to those infrastructures, but not just increase the surface, we've extended it. So people don't need physical access to our infrastructures anymore. You can be almost anywhere in the world and potentially, if you have a network connection, have access to it. So, the perspective we're taking is, how do you make those systems more inherently resilient? And there's a lot of research that needs to happen, and there you probably, with this kind of conference, we're having discussions around artificial intelligence, right, machine learning, quantum computing, and things like that. Those will be elements of our critical infrastructure 20, 50 years, right? How do we then develop this and set that trajectory so that we are more resilient in the future? So that's the fundamental research that hasn't really taken place, and in a way where we take into account the fact that everything's going to be interconnected and everything's going to be digitized.
Thank you very much, Juan. We are already connected. Max Everett spoke about the ATM, so it's a little bit, so I'll tell you a story that you will understand very well. Because not always you need to have the credit card with you. I got a phone call from my bank about 2 days ago, and they say, your wife's credit card was stolen. He said, yes, I know. Why didn't you update us about it? I say, listen, the thief takes less than my wife is spending, so I was very happy about it. So sometimes it's even better. We have here, not in the panel, but we have here also people from other countries who were not able to take a part. Maybe some of you would like to come out with any question. Denmark, India. Let's start with India. I'm very honored to say that, please, sir. I'm very honored to say that we have with us Lieutenant General Rajesh Pant. He is the National Cybersecurity Coordinator. I'm very proud to have you with us. Very important to know what is going on in India, so thank you very much for talking.
Thank you, Rami. Yeah, thank you, Rami, once again. And as you said, I represent 1.3 billion people. Every sixth person is an Indian, and not here, but definitely on the beach. You'll find them. So just a few words about what we're doing in India before I ask the question. We recently created a National Critical Information Infrastructure Protection Center. And we do identification at 3 levels. First level is we've identified 6 core sectors. So if energy is one of them, it includes oil and gas and the rest of it. And then the second part, in those sectors, what is the information infrastructure? That is the second part of our exercise. And the third part is, since we cannot protect every part of the information infrastructure, what is the protected system that we want to worry about? Something like what Max was trying to say. So we've done that, it's been notified, and that is what we are protecting with, the hardware, the software, the encryption, or depending on the sectors.
Do you have a special ICS cert?
We do.
For the energy? Yes.
That's right, that's right. So we have sectoral certs also, because in our scheme of things, the scale is very, very high, So my specific question is probably addressed to the certification part, that now that things are getting so complex, and let's say the banking system has a different role altogether and a different architecture altogether, the core banking system, etc. The oil and gas may have a totally different architecture. So is there a case for a separate certification for critical sectors? You see, the present CISA and the CISSP are very generic certifications. So I was just thinking, I don't know if ICS squared may like to respond to this, as to whether you are also thinking on these lines. That is a question.
Thank you. Liliana, you are going to respond? Yes, please.
So, question about certifications, yes, CISSP is
It was almost like you have to push it in for like a few seconds from the bottom.
What we are trying to do, we are trying to develop more certificates, specific certification for the different. We tried with concentrations of CISSP. However, this wasn't quite interested to the professionals. What we are now enhancing more is the systems security certification professional, which should be more technically oriented. What we are also trying to introduce is those industrial control systems and certifications which will cover in more detail those specific knowledges that are required for the professionals. However, all those certifications, since we are a non-for-profit organization, it requires people who will be able to produce the body of knowledge, who will be able to produce exam questions and all of that. And this is something that really, demands a lot of work. And on the other side, we don't want to spread a number of certifications into too many of them, because we need to make sure people who have certifications actually see value, and organizations who pay, most organization pays to these experts to get that certification, that sees value in that as well. But yes, you are right, we should develop sector-specific certification, and this is the direction that we are going in.
Yes, please, Ila. Yes, you can all add.
So you touched certifications, right? And I've seen something interesting actually in France. Okay, it's not an individual certification; it's a certification for services providers, and they do touch the skills of the individuals involved in delivering the service for. It's not called critical infrastructure. Okay, in France it's called vital services, or vital services operators. And if you, as a services provider, and BT is a service provider, I'm just going through the process myself. So if you, as a service provider, want to work with vital services providers in the country, you must obtain a certificate. So, for example, you have the PASSI certificate, which is to become an auditor. And there are specific categories and specific requirements that you need to apply with. You have PDIS, which is for incident detection. So if you want to have a SOC that deals with incident detection for critical infrastructure or vital services, you have to be compliant with PDIS. And there is a PRIS, which is for incident response services for vital services operators. So, and some of the requirements do touch individuals and their skills, and are there kept up to date in order to provide services to those organizations. I hope that's kind of relevant.
Roberto, you wanted to add something about it? Please, please. Yeah. Anybody can refer.
So just trying to share my view from a person who have 20 years of experience in private sector. I am part of the IC technical committee working on industrial automation security, and on working group for safety and security, part of INISA for the industry 4.0 security. So I think we don't need more standards. Okay? The same way, I have a certain view on certifications. They provide you some level, basic level of assurance about the knowledge. So if you take CCNA's certification, okay, he knows about subnetting, some basic things. In the industrial control world system, there is the GICSP, which has been, a few years ago, launched by, I think, SANS. It was like a certification to provide some basic assurance about knowledge of industrial control system, which is a cross-vertical. It's not a specifically one sector. From my standpoint, this is something which, can be required or not. Training would be more desirable than actual certification. For me, it's more important you to go to the training to get the certification. But what is more important to me is having the commitment from the leadership on those things. The reason I'm here, the reason I'm growing my team, the reason I'm even speaking is because I've been given this chance, even under tight economic conditions, because the oil and gas business is under pressure from a cost-wise, I say. The reason I'm here is because it shows some commitment from the leadership to make some things happen. If this is not the case, there's no chance of success. You can take whatever certification you want. It's going to be an individual effort. So to me, that should be something which, should really be taken care of. Try to convey this kind of risk awareness. And as has been said during some other panels, it's not only risk. We have seen it's a growth engine for Israel. It's also an enabler. And there is pressure from regulation and bodies to increase this level of baseline security. So if you tell me certification, important up to a certain point.
Excellent, thank you. Anybody else from the forum would like to comment, please?
Just a very small addition is that the fact that linking to certification is something that we've been discussing recently with European Commission for actually the whole European Union to maybe to think of both also some kind of a common European also I mean the certification of special IT special security IT specialists European Union that will actually consider also the knowledge of current regulations, because what I think is what is also vital that you when you employ someone is to make sure that he knows not only the technical technical background or have the technical competence, but at the same time also understands the requirements, the consequences of specific law and regulations that nevertheless are still very characteristic for given country or given region. And the international certification is not something that actually guarantees this knowledge. So it has to be combined. And I think you can think of some national standards, but in terms of actually in the case of Europe, where we have the same NIS directive, actually that has been imposed of all European countries, then it might make sense actually to have some certification to actually check the knowledge in this area also. So then it's not really sectorial then, but also considering this legal part of the competences.
Thank you. Biljana wanted to add, and if somebody else in the forum would like to add, it's very important.
Yes,
and Yossi, later I'm going to ask you to speak about the Israeli case, because you know it from the history till today, and I know you prepare a nice presentation.
I just wanted to add to this certification itself. I know there is something going on at the level of European Union, initiative from ENISA on cybersecurity certification that would actually cover all of this. I don't know exactly how it's going or whether it's moving fast enough or not, but it's a good intention. And absolutely, yes, certification is something that many companies ask for from their providers. They kind of feel if you have a certification, then you know how to do your job. But the real truth is you have to maintain your knowledge. Certification is important. It's really important to get that CISSP or whatever. But that's not something you should completely rely on. It's a good intention, really value to the organization, to an individual. However, there is much more behind just the certification.
Mr. Kolaski, how does it go in the USA? How do you work with certifications or ever? Max, okay. Max.
Yeah, I mean, I have my CISSP, so I'm probably biased.
Ethically acceptable.
but we do, and I think everybody's covered it, right? Which is the certification helps us set a bit of a baseline, but look, any of us, if anybody in here who's ever had to hire people, understands very well, right? You see the person that's 2 years out of school that suddenly has a CISSP, and you're scratching your head a bit because we know the standards, and they actually require you to have not only the education but some experience. And it's, again, the certification it's not the beginning of a path, it's a marker on that path that should and has to include sort of continued education. And the reality for all of us, anybody who's been in this industry understands that it's grown, it's changed, right? And a number of us have spoken about the fact that you yourself, of course, even 5 years ago, with many technical audiences saying the word SCADA, they would have scratched their head. And so, but now many of us who came up from a more IT background, certainly if you're working in critical infrastructure or energy other places, you very much understand this. And so, and it's going to change again. As we get more integration, you hear things like smart grid and other things, it's going to change again. As AI, as we move from machine learning to true AI, all of our roles in cybersecurity are going to change dramatically because of the nature of what AI will do for both defenders and attackers. It's going to require a new level of education and a new way to address how we organize SOCs, how we organize information sharing, right? So this is the great challenge, I think, for people in cybersecurity and technology in general. Doctors, they're learning and changing their practice, but it doesn't change that much, right? There's incremental additions. I'd vary to say we have wholesale change in how we do our jobs on a every other year basis sometimes. And so the certifications, again, they're a baseline to get us there, but they're not an end all for any of us.
Thank you. Aviram, maybe you can say some words about the Israeli case?
Well, we say in Israel that there is a lot of security people in IT and communication also, but we don't see many security personnel that work with industrial control system, ICIS, SCADA, DCS, infrastructures, big infrastructures. I mean, there is no course or training for security personnel in this area. In Israel, we train our people, and we must have them specialize in IT and communication. Then we bring them to those worlds. What's happened in your countries? How do you manage to train people to do the security in these areas, and what is the future plans in this area?
Interesting. Another gentleman, Alice, speaker. Give me a mic. I will give it to him.
I can stand up, and my voice is quite strong.
Okay.
Good evening. Thanks for opening the floor to questions. My name is John Ariel. I'm the CEO of a company that was involved in called narrative warfare, which is a very new term. And my question is primarily to those involved in policy making or think tanks. One thing that has been, to my mind, conspicuous by its absence has been the political infrastructure. And we've seen since 2015, 2014, 15 and onwards, just how effective some of these kind of attacks can be. And we should perhaps remember von Clausewitz's famous statement that war is diplomacy by other means. A country is ultimately a political entity. And if a state player, I won't mention any names, is determined and has a policy of one of its prime methods of assaulting its perceived enemies, opponents, is to subvert their political systems by contaminating their national narrative, should this be regarded as a vital infrastructure, and how would you go about it? Thank you.
Who would like to reply? Bob? Thank you.
So yeah, we lived through this. We made election infrastructure, critical infrastructure in January of 2017 in the face of what we now know to be the Russian attempt to screw with our election in 2016. Sorry, screw might not be the, it's late. I'm allowed, yes. And we did it, in hindsight, we should have done it before, because what happened in 2016 is we didn't have the information sharing, we didn't have the knowledge of the infrastructure, we did not have the relationships, so that when we started to see cyber intrusions on our election infrastructure, we were kind of in the blind. We had to make relationships, we had to make up information sharing on the fly. In front of our 2018, the next federal elections, we were so much better at that. So our election infrastructure itself is more secure than it was in 2016. We had to have a debate as a country as to what it meant to be critical infrastructure. We were not federalizing the conduct of our elections. We were federalizing the support to our state and locals who have the responsibility to conduct the elections. So we believe that we've made a lot of progress as a country at securing the actual infrastructure that enables the voting process. Does that then cause adversaries who still want to, since I was allowed to say screw the first time, still want to screw with our democratic processes to go somewhere else, social media, pushing false narratives, doing other counterintelligence things? I think that's some of, what comes next in terms of managing risk. So if we made one aspect of the infrastructure more secure, or pushing them in a different direction, we have to build those similar relationships. I'm not ready to call Facebook critical infrastructure, but I do want to know Facebook's security executives. I do want to know Facebook's executives, and I want Facebook out to see anomalies, and I want people to be able to report to Facebook and take more dramatic action these things do. And so we're working through that. This is a public-private partnership, and then we are, on the technology side, trying to chase down how you see anomalies. Again, these companies are going to see these things. They've invested a ton of money because it's existential to their businesses that they're not being used for intelligence operations, right? If that happens too much, they're in real jeopardy. So they're investing a lot. We're there to work with them, help them, try to give them some indicators, and try to exchange information. And we then have to think about it from a critical infrastructure perspective. It's not just democracy. undermining public health messaging, undermine confidence in financial institutions, undermining whether in the middle of a disaster, whether power is working. Those sorts of things can also become risk factors that we have to think about, all of us collectively, that false information can actually have impact on critical infrastructure. And so, we got to be out there thinking about this. We got to add this to our risk calculus. Got to build the relationships, the tools to be able to see it. But I think that the technology enablers are a big part of the solution because this is really important to them as well.
By the way, according to some open sources in Israel, the election committee in Israel was not considered to be critical infrastructure, but according to these sources, the Israeli National Cyber Directorate was in charge to make sure that the elections will go smoothly without any kind of cybersecurity. And now we gave them another chance, because usually in another country they make their lessons learned every 4 years. In Israel it's every 4 months, at least now. So good luck to you. We are on your side. Please, who else wanted to commit?
I completely agree here with Bob that definitely seeing the fact or experiencing the fact that the electoral process can be influenced either directly or indirectly. I think this is probably here the most where it gets more complex, is because in fact in the case of direct interference, in case of Poland, I mean the election system is also part of the critical infrastructure. But at the same time, what we are also seeing constantly, which actually also with a peak, I would say, around election times, of course, some misinformation, disinformation activities that happen in cyberspace. And then I think that this is a definitely vital question. I mean, to some extent, actually, still have some security requirements in terms of for the systems actually serving the content, like for the social media, which again, makes it so complicated because you have like global players here who actually, with the country of origin is very much usually different than country of destination in terms of provide information they provide. So here we touch on some international also measures that maybe I think has to be applied in order to exercise some pressure on actually the private companies or the way of imposing some national regulations on international companies. But another, I think, interesting example that may also be part of critical infrastructure, or maybe in some countries is, in Poland not the case, are actually the survey or poll agencies, which in the end can also, providing the results very, in some proximity of the elections, with the results can also influence actually the choices of people, because people tend to vote for the party that actually has some chances to win. So in terms of actually being able to hack into the poll system and then provide some result that can also influence in the end the result of election. So another factor then here to be understood, and of course the beat media portals providing also the information where the misinformation, disinformation campaign again may actually also have some impact on how the people actually then behave. But then here, of course, we have to still definitely keep the right balance, not to overreact, because on the other hand, we have the control, but on the other hand, we have the freedom of speech and of expression. So then, very hard to find the balance with the security is concerned, but I think your question was actually definitely very up to date. So these are, I also agree, what I can confirm, these are the topics that we are also currently discussing now in Poland.
Thank you very much. Before going to each one of you to speak about, because Yossi, I didn't forget you. And after Yossi, and before going, I want to see whether there is somebody else from the audience who would like to ask questions. I see the people also from Finland. You are here? Financial? No, I was mistaken. Yes. Yes, please. Just a second. I want you to present yourself, please.
Thank you so much. My name is Marie Wessel. I'm with the Danish Ministry of Finance, heading the cyber and information security there. And I want to thank you for organizing this very relevant discussion on critical infrastructure. And I've been listening to all of you, and it's very interesting to hear on what you're saying. We're doing exactly the same in Denmark as you're all doing right now. Defined 6 critical sectors in Denmark, and we are trying to make the list of the critical infrastructure within the sectors, and we are trying to make this list not too long, because then it's very difficult for us. So any information that you can share on what are the criteria that you looked into on your definition and the method you used? Have you defined any sectors which is more critical than other sectors and so on? And maybe you can go more into this now or at a later stage. It would be very interesting for us to share some information on this issue. Thank you.
I really hope that somebody is going to summarize it up so we will be able to disseminate this information between yourself. I don't know if we are doing it. Mr. Schneck, after you, I will get each one of you 2 minutes to summarize what you have learned and what you suggest for the next time. And if anybody of you has a special subject to be discussed by next year, please let us know, because I think that we are moving fast, and especially with the critical infrastructure. So let's be up to date. Yossi, please.
So, Rami, thank you. I don't want what you are expecting, but I will do what I want. So it's okay for you. Okay. So I would like to talk about 2 issues. One of them go back to your original plan of the 4 questions. I will choose one of them, but I would like to talk a little bit about certification. Actually, when we started, and my friends are together with me, when we started talking about cyber, asking about certification was almost like asking the Wright brothers if they have certification to fly or for a pilot. So actually we certified our people or by our very unique entities in the army and in the service and then in the company itself. But one thing that I would say is most important, it can be certified or not, is actually the integration at the end of the day of the cyber knowledge and the business knowledge. The most effective people that we have in our company and we are trying to grow are actually people that are specialists in a level in cyber and the business process. So for example, in utility, our power station engineers that have also the knowledge, proper knowledge in cyber, those are the best thing. And I think that we in any industry should look for certification for such people and to create the environment to grow up those people. Now, if you allow me, I will go back a little bit to one of your questions that say, how do we approach risk analysis and management in differentiating differently in critical infrastructure in comparison to other sectors. So as I started in the previous question, I would like a little bit to twist the issue. And I will start a little bit really tough and say that actually the traditional risk systems that we are using and most of the companies are using does not fit the real cyber needs that we are talking about. We have to change it differently. And if you ask me, it's true for critical systems and true for any other sectors. I agree that this discrepancy is very or more critical and important in critical system, but it's still important in any sector you are talking about. Now, ICIS asked this question time ago and actually developed let's say a new methodology and understanding how our cyber risk assessment should be managed and dealt. And we are asking question, many of our colleagues in company, a simple question. How risky is your risk assessment? Because at the end of the day, the risk assessment, if it is done okay, it's actually used for decision making in routine time or in emergency time in cyber assessment. So the traditional risk assessment, cyber risk assessment or risk assessment is for characteristics that I don't think fit the new exponential world that we are living in. And cyber is actually, I think, the most excellent example for this excellent, the rate of change, the pace of change, the pace of innovation in this environment is so big that this is the excellent example for the exponential world. So those four characteristics. First of all, usually risk analysis is periodic. It's snapshot based. You do some work on risk analysis. Most of the company are doing it. If they are very, very good, they are doing it monthly, quarterly, usually much more. It's based on data that is gathered that is actually not very relevant to current situation or what is happening. So it's periodic, it's snapshot based. It's not so predictive. It's not so predictive. It predicts some directions maybe according to what you find in your company, but it's not predicting, for example, what can be the new kind of attacks or new kind of technologies of the attackers or systems that will be used. And it's based in most of the assumption on estimation, not on much of hard and real and updated data. So our principles and our methodology is a little bit different. First of all, it's continuous. Our tools and our methodology are talking about continuous risk assessment. We are gathering continuously data, and we are close as much as possible to the reality that we are facing now, and not on something that was gathered 2, 3, or 4 months ago. Second thing, it touches the life cycle. What I mean by life cycle? In organization, actually, there are different processes and systems that are in different life cycle stages. Risk assessment between those life stages, for example, design stage, deployment stage, or operation and maintenance stage, there are a huge difference between them how you estimate the risk assessment. It should be taken in account in your risk assessment picture. Many things. I know most of the risk assessment are based on traffic, on network analysis, and many other things. But there is a lot of additional parameters and data that should be taken to enrich, we call it enrichment, to enrich your understanding of the risk. And there are not always only technological, there are a lot of additional parameters. And the last thing, you have to have some tool or service to validate, to have the ability to validate that actually really validate in a lab or in some kind of emulation or simulation to validate it. So I think that we actually, after we change our attitude in these things, we have much more better risk picture. It's actually brought, it's additionally brought to different stakeholders in the company in their language. And at the end of the day, it improves significantly the ability to have proper decisions in the right time. And again, it's true for critical infrastructure and from other sectors. As I say, critical for critical infrastructure, it's much more important. And I invite all of you to talk to us, and we can actually elaborate more about it.
Thank you. So it means that whenever you are speaking about cyber, look at this as a part of the business. Don't look at this as a threat, but look how it is affecting business, which is the most important one. Yeah. Before going to summarize, and I know you want...
Say something? I want to refresh the question of the lady in the crowd.
Okay, please. Please, ladies, I cannot resist it.
And I think it was a good question, because we really talk about how do you create the list, and you might be onboarding too many companies to the list, so how to keep it focused, right? The list of critical infrastructure or essential services providers. And I don't represent a policymaker. I represent a commercial organization, but I know NIS, okay? And in NIS, what they highlighted there, that in some categories, you might have companies that will need a lighter approach, that might meet the criteria, but you might want to apply a lighter approach, which is a bit more reactive and less proactive. So it could be a way for you when you establish this list of companies who meets the criteria, but in which cases we can also adopt a lighter approach just to keep it more focused and under control. And again, I'm just a commercial organization, but I think they manage to help dilute the list a little bit and keep it focused.
Thank you. I would like 2 more questions, and then we'll start summarizing, because otherwise we are going to no dinner. So I know. Thank you very much. Yes, they have to go back to the embassy, and Minister Popovich has a flight. He was maybe tell them that there is a bomb and they waited for him, but don't do it again. So yes, yes, madam. Please present yourself.
I'm Sandra Sargent of the World Bank. And my question is, who in the government should be involved in the decision making on what is critical infrastructure?
I think it's a good question. I think my first challenge to that question would be who not in the government should be involved in the decision about making what the definition of critical infrastructure. So in the UK, we've just completed a process, a mapping exercise that we did with industry, where we worked together to identify the process by which you identify critical national infrastructure, so that we could map out that process together, and then we could use that to go through and identify critical infrastructure. I think in terms of definition involvement within government, the UK approach is to go very wide. So certainly you need to be talking to a wide range of departments with a wide range of responsibilities, because otherwise you're not picking up enough of the disparate needs across the different sectors and the different interests. You may have a lead department who then corrals that into some, cohesive thinking about how you take your definition ahead. But I would certainly say that you need some kind of wide engagement there.
Yeah, I think from a U.S. perspective, we separate that question. One is, what is critical infrastructure? And that should be, to some extent, an analytic question that's based on the thing that's really critical for national security, economic security. And to answer that question, similarly, industry's got to be in the conversation to understand the infrastructure. And then the second half of the question is, for what purpose is the definition of critical infrastructure going to be used? And the more restrictions, then that's kind of a regulatory or some other similar conversation of how is it going to affect calling something critical infrastructure. But I think we've taken one as a pure analytic question, so we're not having a lot of arguments over what it's going to do to business by naming something critical infrastructure. But then if it is going to have impacts on business, then you have to have a policy process that involves those things. So, and I think that works because ultimately governments have to analytically know the things that are really important to the functioning of their country, but they don't want to then put so many restrictions that they're going to have chilling effects on the businesses that end up being really important on the country.
If I might just quickly add, so all of this is pretty well regulated within the laws that we have in the European Union, and the way these laws are implemented locally. So, for example, I'm looking at the law in Croatia. It says government should decide which are the critical sectors. Within these critical sectors, there should be bodies which would make a decision on who is actually critical infrastructure, who is not, and so on. And then later, this process comes up. Regarding the question about the criteria, we have, and I can share it with you, really described criteria on why some company from energy sector would be considered critical based on, I don't know, how much energy it produces, or telecom sector, how many people it serves, and so on. So these are publicly available criteria in that separate specific local law.
Great, thank you. Mr. Franco, would you like also to comment on this question? Like a part of the audience. Give him a mic. You can come here also.
So good afternoon. So
First of all, we need to identify how to identify what are the process to find the next critical infrastructure. This is a big and tough questions because we know what we know, but what with the other entities that we didn't define. So we have a new protocol how to define the next critical infrastructure. And when we define and we find it, we are doing inside our, let's say, critical infrastructure, we are doing some jobs to understand this is a real cyber threat. It's not enough that it is important. We need to define and to look if we have some threats, cyber threats. This is the second edition. After that, we have the law, and under the law B84, this is a committee by my general director, Una, and he decided if it's critical infrastructures, and if he decided, it start a process in our government till the prime minister, and he is the last to decide that this is a critical. If it's a critical, we start a process now, a real risk assessment based on our tools, and from now we have 5 steps or a criteria to direct the critical infrastructure. Just to say, we change our direction and our guidance from, let's say, from method to boots on the ground. It means in all our critical infrastructure, we are a special team led by Eli Gazit. He is head of the division for critical infrastructures, and we lead not just methodology, we support also with a specific technological tools, because if it's critical, it means we need to do something else. And of course, part of this is classified, but this is how we support part of our critical infrastructures. This is the all main picture in 1 minute. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And it's very special in Israel. It's a very special case. Do you believe that if you are a company and you heard that your competitor maybe became a critical infrastructure, you didn't, you start to feel very bad, although suddenly the other guy has a regulator which is a very demanding one. We didn't have the chance now to speak about the Israeli ecosystem and the Israeli culture. Cyber is a culture in Israel. And this is the most important, I believe, word to remember from your visit this time. Last question. No? Okay. Okay, I'm going, it's okay, you, okay?
Well, can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm David Martel. I don't belong to any government or a large company. I'm a consultant. I specialize in maritime cybersecurity. So 2 years ago, we were actually in the middle of this very same infrastructure session in the conference. The news came that thanks to Russia attacking Ukrainian infrastructure with a cyber attack, Maersk, the biggest shipping company in the world, suddenly become paralyzed, and it wasn't able to carry out its normal functions. And the result of this was that because of the way the shipping industry functions, Maersk ships were being held up in ports that Maersk was running all over the world. So in fact, there was a traffic jam of ships outside the port of Los Angeles and many other ports as a result of what had happened in Odessa. Now, maritime trade is $5 trillion every year. The whole world economy depends on it. So this is actually the ultimate, not national, international critical infrastructure. And the problem is that the cyber vulnerability of this critical infrastructure hasn't yet been dealt with properly, not at a national level and not at an international level. The International Maritime Organization, which is the global regulator, is still playing around thinking about what the draft regulations that come out in about 2 years' time are going to say. There is work being done by other organizations, particularly what's called classification societies, which essentially give
Thank you.
How can we use the ability of national cyber organizations, national regulators, national intelligence agencies to make this better? There is work being done elsewhere, even at the UN, but it's going to take a long time. And the long time it will be a catastrophe.
Okay. I suggest that we will stop here because we realized we understood the question, and if anybody would like to answer, okay, please.
Oh, sorry. So in Japan, the Japanese government has been annually hosting a national joint cyber exercise with critical infrastructure companies over the last decade. And the first one, which happened 10 years ago, was only with 100 companies, but still 100. And the last one, held in December 2018, was over 3,000 people from different local governments in Japan, and also from the central government, and also from all of the critical infrastructure sectors. So that way, because we talked a little bit about interdependency between the different critical infrastructure sectors, and without having a joint cyber exercise covering the entire nation, of course we have to consider the international cascading effects by cyber attacks, but without having the first step to have the national level cyber joint exercise, it's impossible to understand whom to communicate with and how. And also, when you talk about the critical infrastructure protection, you also have to consider different risks, because it can be by cyber attacks, but also can be from system breakdown or natural disasters, and you will never know at the first place if it's coming from system breakdown or natural disaster or cyber attack. So that's why you have to work with different people like SOC, CERT, natural disaster management team, and cybersecurity and OTIT to make sure that you have a set of good skill sets to deal with different risks.
Thank you very much. We are now, we understand the importance of national exercises, which is also something being done by the Israeli National Cyber Directorate and many other companies as well. So I think we understand the need. And since time is running too quickly and we are enjoying our time, let's start and summarize. Each one of you, whatever you decide, but not more than 1 or 2 minutes, what are your conclusions for such a meeting, for this meeting? Please, we'll start from this place because I want the Israeli guy to be the last one. He's the host, he has to be polite.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll take 30 seconds. I mean, Cyber Week has been a great experience for me. It was the first time I came here. Very interesting topics, impressed by the level of commitment from the institutions, the government. Prime Minister was here, was transparent to how this was growth engine for the country and the vision for the future. Conclusion is, there are a couple of things which I wanted to mention, which ties with what you said. Information sharing is important. Reason why I also have a meeting with the ICND tomorrow morning. I didn't even know of its existence until yesterday. And the other thing is to keep the focus on this subject. I mean, I'm sure it is important, at least in my country. I guess in other countries as well. I don't think I'm the worst.
Thank you.
So other than the information sharing and interdependency, then I think that it's important to have trust based upon a multi-stakeholder approach. So I think that the Cyber Week is a great and excellent platform to bring different countries, different sectors, and different organizations. So look at this panel and also the audience, look around, because we see so many different nationalities and different organizations, and what we all care about is cybersecurity and how to work better together on the critical infrastructure protection, so beyond the interest of one organization or one country. So I think it's really encouraging for us, and that for the Israel and also different countries and Tel Aviv universities so much care about the critical infrastructure protection and also cybersecurity to bring together the collectiveness of insights from different organizations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Neil?
So, as a representative of a technology vendor and not a policy maker, what our insight is that attacks are getting more sophisticated, and that when you look at critical infrastructure, it's the attacks that really are the biggest risk. I mean, we're talking about certification and business continuity, and a lot of risks are statistical or due to all kinds of breakdowns in the chain and supply chain issues, etc. But at the end of the day, the things that can cause catastrophic failure are man-made, so something that has intent behind it and is designed to disrupt. And what we see is that there's a growing gap between the level of sophistication of the attacks and the defenses. So we, as a vendor and our peers in the security community, are constantly building new technologies, new solutions, new processes to battle the ongoing campaigns. And we see the industry and critical infrastructure in particular being very, very slow to adopt these technologies. Checkpoint, just to make that concrete to ourselves and to our customers, we created a scale, and we say we are in the 5th generation of cyber attacks. And unfortunately, most of the enterprises, the organizations, even our customers, if we're at the 5th generation, most of them aren't even at the 3rd generation of protections. And I think that, and they might have very good paperwork. And that is a point that I would make here. It's also important to actually do security and not just fill in the paperwork.
Great. It's good that you spoke about 5th generation, not about the 5G, but this is another issue.
Yes, the point I would like to make here is actually related to your question, what we should talk about next year. So we all know about talking about critical infrastructure, the laws we are making, policymakers and so on, and all of these laws have something in there that says you should check how it's going, you should check how it's applied. You need someone to respect the situation and so on. If you look, for example, in HIPAA regulation in the States many years ago, and recently there was a conference on health industry, and that's one of the certificates which we do have, it's certified health information system professional, by the way. The same problems that were there when HIPAA was introduced 15 years ago, they are still there. And they come down to continuous risk assessment and management, and they come down to third-party relationships. Trust into vendors, trust into ability of vendors to provide what you are asking for, and how the risk that comes maybe from the vendor's side influences your environment. And what should we do to actually enhance this process? How should we implement some mechanisms that will make it easier for the vendors to work with governments and with other companies as well, but also not occupy them with papers and policies, what is happening right now. I'm currently on a project for an air traffic systems provider, and they have vendors that are actually resisting to operate in a way they define their procedures. I can understand both parties. Vendor is a huge company as well, not really ready to change existing ways of work because of some procedure or policy or so on. There needs to be understanding from both sides. And that's why I think also these conferences are great, just to change opinions, to understand each other.
Thank you. Mr. Kolaski, please.
Sure. So some of you may know that in our Democratic Party, we have 23 candidates currently running for president. 20 of them are debating on stage over the next 2 nights, and I just say I feel like those 20 candidates now, because now I know what it's like to sit up here with a lot of people wanting to say more than you have an opportunity to say. That being said, last word, a couple points just to hit on. One is a lot of the companies, has been made, this point's made, a lot of the companies that are critical infrastructure and declared and thought of that in each of our countries do business in multiple countries. And the degree to which there's sort of a harmonization to philosophy and approach and then some customized implementation, I think helps global businesses. And I'm pleased that, philosophically there's a lot of similarities here on the page. And I think ultimately that will help companies that are critical infrastructure providers. And then the other thing that I'm playing with in my head that I haven't quite figured out is, it's neat that cybersecurity is a source of innovation, but ultimately I think what we should want to be as the source of innovation is infrastructure design and more efficient and effective businesses that take security into consideration, but the security shouldn't be the source of innovation. The advancement should be the source of innovation, but security should be at the table as part of innovation. And I do think that sometimes, we're security professionals, I guess, but as we focus on security. But what we need to really get to is a point where you can innovate in the delivery of these services in a way that security is part of the characteristics, and we're not taking too much risk. But don't let security be the driver of this. Let the advancement of our societies be the driver of this, with security as a consideration.
Okay, so I think it has been maybe it hasn't been expressed here so bluntly or so vividly during this panel, but I heard this a number of times during Cyber Week, and I think it is important to mention that we definitely put a lot of attention to detection, but we should put as much to the prevention. I think here, in terms of, let's say, harmonizing, unifying, being consistent between the countries, and also reflecting what has been said, we are so much interlinked between the countries. So I think in terms of having the same approach, having the same minimal requirements for the design of the systems, for some process management in terms of the business process in certain sectors. I think there is more streamlining, more cooperation, and more let's say coordination will be very helpful. And in terms of detection, definitely the active participation of given countries in the already existent CSERT networks. Either there's one in the European level, there's another one, the first network at the global level. Definitely would also help to make the communication process of potential incidents also very helpful, so that the reaction will be as fast as possible. And I think here also both the bilateral and the multilateral cooperation between the countries, between the companies, and within the sectors, but also regionally, globally, definitely something to be looked upon, and something that would make our cyberspace safer.
Thank you. Thank you. I want also to take the opportunity to thank the audience. I think that the questions that you provided were all extremely valid, and those were important questions that needed to be asked. So really, thank you. They were good questions. I didn't always have good answers to them, but they were all very good questions. So thank you for that. As closing words, I want to talk about something that we didn't talk a lot about in this session, and it's about collaboration, information sharing, intelligence sharing between ourselves, also with law enforcement agencies. I represent an organization, BT, that really believes in that. It was the first telco in the world to sign a collaboration with the Interpol on cyber intelligence. We also collaborate with the Europol, with NCSC, with the Italian police. So it's an important matter, and I think we need to give it maybe more attention and spend time talking about it, because it's extremely beneficial for different companies, especially for critical infrastructure.
Excellent. So what I get out of this meeting seems to be that when it comes to identifying critical infrastructures, we are pretty much on the same page. We have slightly different priorities, but we can pretty much agree on the general direction. What will be the next step, I think, is to identify what do we need to do once we have identified something as a critical infrastructure. Risk assessment, I think we all will agree, but the next step will be much harder and much more controversial, I think, because that's at least what we see even internally at our think tank, that when we discuss the next concrete steps, what should be done, we have much more diverse opinions, so that might be an interesting discussion next year, like what should we then do about it.
Very good, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Rami, and thank you, everybody. I think just to build on a couple of things that have just been said, I thought this was a very fruitful discussion. It's great to hear everybody's definitions, but I think for the next session we might want to bring in an element of caution about focusing unnecessarily on definitions. The definition that you apply is crucial to have clear in your mind about what your definition is, and it's great if you can share that, that's fantastic. But really the definition is in some ways nothing, because the definition is a first step towards applying a risk management process. It's there so that you can do your risk management. And you need to be updating that over time. So in the UK, we have guidance that sits under our definition, and we update that every 2 years or so. The threat evolves, the attack vectors evolve, everything becomes digitalized, so previously electoral systems might not have fallen into something that we worried about in this context, but now they do. And if you're not doing that update, then your definition is really in some ways irrelevant, because you're not taking that continuous and iterative process that goes with risk management into account with how you apply your definition. So in the UK this year, we've just started our next cybersecurity regulations and incentives review, which will look both at what is already CNI, but also at those areas which we consider to be high risk or where there is systemic risk in the system. And we will consider whether the patchwork framework that we have for regulating CNI is actually sufficiently robust. Are there some sectors which no longer need to be in that definition? Are there other areas that should be? And is the regulation which is there, which is not cyber-specific, robust enough in comparison to, say, the NIS regulation, which is a cyber-specific regulation, to provide the protection that we need? So I think great to have the discussion about definition, but let's not lose sight of what it is that we actually need to do with that, which is really the important thing that we need to be talking about.
Please, Mr. Nassif.
Great. Well, three remarks based on what I've heard and the questions that were made. First, about capacity building. I think that's quite important, and we couldn't have chance to dive deep in this important issue. In Brazil, you know, there's a lack of professionals as well. It ranges from 50,000 to 150,000. It depends on the statistics that you use. But we are lacking of professionals in cybersecurity as well. Next week, we will do the first joint exercise. And although we need more professionals, at least we are providing some capacity building in this joint exercise, putting together energy, nuclear, telecom, and financial sectors. It's very important for us to at least see how these people can live and act in a real situation. Joint exercises can at least provide some answers to this critical issue about capacity building. The other thing is the inclusion of new sectors as critical. I think that this can raise a lot of concerns from the targeted sector. It's quite difficult for you to include. If it's not, for instance, a public service, how can you include this sector as critical infrastructure? Because of course people and those companies and sectors can be very concerned about more prescriptive regulation. The identification, I don't recognize now the Danish lady, but the identification of critical assets within the sector, it's not very easy to do. We, in the telecommunication sector, we provided a form and instructions for the sector to how to answer the forms, but we should be very careful, because by imposing very prescriptive form, very prescriptive questions, you can have a lot of things defined as critical, and at the end you don't know exactly what is critical. And the question and the answers may be misleading as well, because, well, the companies may provide some answers that are not really true, because again, concerned and fear of more prescriptive regulation. So this is something that we must be very careful as regulators and policymakers.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for being here and attend this very good session.
Thank you. Yossi?
So Rama, I do it really shortly, 2 points only. One, generally, I think such a conference, such a meeting is very important, because I said that I'm always jealous of the friends or colleagues from the dark side, and I see huge cooperation between them until the last detail, and we on the good guy side are not always doing it. I think it's a very good base to do it. And the second point, the lessons learned for next year, please, more convenient chairs for the panel members. Thank you.
I agree with you. And also for the moderator. Huh? Okay.
So from the session and the people that talked, the most important things that I gather as well is around information sharing, right, between nations and countries. What happened in one country is going to happen to the other one as well. Not everyone is unique, right? So sharing that information and being able to cross-share and exchange is very, very critical as well. And I think with the gap that closes between the IT and the OT networks and the threat landscape changing, it's very, very important to have a mind shift as well, that a lot of things now are digital. They are security-based, right? So we need to change how we think about these things as well. And coming to the last point, it's about a lot of times education and awareness about the people working in these critical infrastructures, right? To be able to educate them to understand how they can defend against these threats as well. Thank you very much for having me today.
Thank you.
First of all, thank you for all of you. You're all correct. From the side of the boot on the ground, well, coming to secure an infrastructure, you need to design security. And by designing security, you have to separate the IT and communication from one side and the OT, ICIS to the other side, because there is different issues in both sides. On the IT side, we know about the CIA. On the security side, on the OT side, sorry, there is the SRP. The SRP is the safety come first, the reliability second, and the process and come in the third place. While we approach to secure infrastructure, we need to know, first of all, what is coming and going from the organization. And then we have to put tools on the outside. This is one major issue that INCD did in the last 2 years. We put strong tools in the internet to know where the attack will come from. We work on the business network on one side, and we work on the ICS network in the other side. And in this way, we try to fit a security suit for each infrastructure. Thank you.
Before having this panel, I had a long visit to the INCD, and I sat together with Eli and with Rafi Franco, and suddenly the question came, why now all the hackers are moving towards OT? Why they are moving into the critical infrastructure and not only to IT? And the answer I received, which I liked very much, was they were dealing a lot with the IT, so everybody invested in IT. So now they say, okay, now IT is combined with OT, and anyhow, maybe OT, they didn't do whatever needed because it's a lot of money, as Yossi said. And I believe that this panel and the other panels related to critical infrastructure that have been here during Cyber Week are very important. I think we're not speaking now anymore about awareness. We have to speak about it, but not in this panel. And I would like very much, first of all, to thank you for making all the long way to come to Israel and visit our beautiful country and take a part in this quite long discussion. And I really hope that you will come in for other reasons as well, meaning to enjoy life in Israel, not only to work and come into panels. I think that this event could not have happened unless the participants here, unless the Tel Aviv University, which arranged Cyber Week, and especially Professor Ben Israel and Gili Drob Heisen, and of course without the Israeli National Cyber Directorate, who came for the first time open-minded to speak about this issue. I really challenge you, Rafi, for next year to come with another small secret to let us know. I think it was very important. I think you did very, very well. And the last thing is to this lady, Ali Sutner. Without her, nothing could have been done. And since it's still early, I wish you all a great evening in Tel Aviv. It is a small apple, not like New York. We are speaking about small scales, not in cyber, of course. In cyber, we are very high scales. But in Tel Aviv, it's a small scale of the apple. Enjoy it and be careful. In the military, we used to say at the end, be careful from traffic, drive safely. Be careful from the crazy guys on the electric scooters and on the electric bikes. And good evening to you all. Thank you.